Here's what's coming up on The World Today. The Brazil variant of COVID-19 said to be driving the surge of infections in South America. Australia and New Zealand agree on a travel bubble, the first of its kind since the pandemic. Plus, Jordan bans reporting about an alleged plot to destabilize the country. A warm welcome to The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia. We begin in South America, where the variant in Brazil is driving up the number of infections. Uruguay and Paraguay registered record numbers of daily deaths, while the total number of COVID cases surpassed the 13 million mark in Brazil. Here's more on this, as well as other situations in the other countries in our global update.
It appears Brazil's brutal surge in COVID-19 deaths will soon surpass the worst of a record January wave in the United States, climbing well beyond an average 3,000 fatalities per day. The overall death toll trails only the United States outbreak, with nearly 333,000 killed, according to the Health Ministry data, compared with more than 555,000 dead in the United States. The country's health system is at breaking point and could exceed total U.S. deaths despite having two-thirds the population. Tanzania's new president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, has said her government would form a committee for scientific research into COVID-19 in a departure from the pandemic skeptic policies of her predecessor, John Magufuli, who died last month. Magufuli died of heart disease at the age of 61. He had dismissed the threat from the coronavirus pandemic, saying God and steam remedies would protect Tanzanians. He opposed mask wearing and social distancing and denounced vaccines as part of a Western conspiracy to take Africans' wealth. And in the United States, new cases of COVID-19 rose 5% to more than 450,000 last week, the third week in a row that infections have increased. The average number of COVID-19 patients in hospitals rose 4% to more than 37,000 in the week ended April 4, breaking a streak of 11 weeks of falling admissions. Health officials were concerned about the increase in travel around the Easter holiday and school spring breaks at a time when more infectious variants of the coronavirus are circulating. Finally, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants a testing regime for international travel to be easy and cheap, hinting that rapid tests could be used after criticism from the airline industry that current requirements are onerous. He says while people had to be realistic over international travel resuming, the government was still targeting May 17, as the data would permit the public to again travel for recreational purposes.
Either over 30 days or over 3 months.
Earlier, he had said he was looking at the role of vaccination passports for overseas travel, which he thinks is going to be a fact of life.
In the meantime, people in Australia and New Zealand will be able to travel between the two nations without having to quarantine from April 19th. Since October, New Zealand travelers have been allowed to enter most Australian states without quarantine, though this has not been reciprocated. But the new move was announced by New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern earlier today.
Australian and New Zealand residents will now be able to travel between the two nations without having to quarantine from the 19th of April. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced the move on Tuesday.
I can confirm that quarantine-free travel between New Zealand and Australia will commence in just under 2 weeks' time, from 11:59 p.m. Sunday, April 18. This is an important step forward in our COVID response and represents an arrangement I do not believe we have seen in any other part of the world, that is safely opening up international travel to another country while continuing to pursue a strategy of elimination and a commitment to keeping the virus out.
Since October, New Zealand travellers have been allowed to enter most Australian states without quarantine, though this had not been reciprocated. But now this has changed. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is pleased.
Another big step today with the opening of the Tasman. It is 6 months ago almost that Australia opened up to New Zealand, and I'm very pleased that the New Zealand government has decided that two-way travel will commence Monday fortnight. Prime Minister Ardern called me last night and we had a very positive discussion about this. It's something we've been talking about for some time. And this is the first of many more steps to come, I believe, as we get back to a more normal position, not only over the course of this year but beyond. This is an important first step.
Both nations have since contained COVID-19 outbreaks and kept their infection rates near zero. The countries shut their borders in March last year and brought in compulsory quarantine for returning nationals. When outbreaks have emerged, both Australia and New Zealand have instated snap lockdowns to halt the virus from spreading.
Many countries are considering it, but for the Global Health Agency, the World Health Organization, vaccination passports should not be a requirement for people to travel, due to uncertainty over whether inoculation prevents transmission of the virus, as well as equity concerns.
We currently do not have enough data on whether or not the vaccines prevent transmission to say that this would be an effective strategy. But the second one is very much the equity issue as well. Currently, not everyone has access to vaccines, and there are groups in society who are excluded. In many countries, for instance, pregnant women are not offered the vaccine, or children under 18. There are large numbers of or people who are immunosuppressed. There are many people who may not be able to get it. And then, of course, there's the lack of access to vaccines in many countries. We're still waiting on adequate supplies to provide the vaccines to all the countries that need them. Right, at that stage, we were expecting to see the process to be completed, but there was more data required. So at the moment, we're looking at the end of, more likely the end of April, but if you look in the tracker that we've provided, you'll get the exact details on the Sinovac and Sinopharm.
The Kingdom of Jordan is trying to douse tensions and uncertainty that have arisen since former Crown Prince Hamza was put under house arrest for plotting with foreign countries to destabilize it by banning reporting about the alleged plot. Hamza has denied the conspiracy allegations, but on Monday signed a letter confirming his loyalty to King Abdullah. Details have now emerged of an apparent angry exchange between the prince and the military chief of staff about restrictions on the prince's freedom. In the letter released by the palace, Prince Hamza is quoted as saying, quote, "I place myself in the hands of the Majesty, the King. I will remain committed to the constitution of the dear Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan." The letter came after mediation. Officials said the king had asked his uncle, Prince Hassan, to help resolve the unprecedented tensions. Well, let's switch gears now to the latest on the Iran nuclear deal, as the United States has joined talks in Vienna aimed at reviving the deal abandoned by former President Donald Trump. Current President Joe Biden has said he wants to return to the landmark accord, but 6 remaining state parties need to find a way for him to lift the sanctions imposed by his predecessor, and for Iran to return to the agreed limits on its nuclear program. Iran says it will not meet the U.S. face-to-face until that happens. The top U.S. officials attending the meeting in Austria are reportedly based in a different hotel to the one hosting the meeting of the delegations from Iran and the other world powers, such as China, France, Germany, Russia, and the UK. European officials are acting as intermediaries. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So while it seems that the United States is eager to restart negotiations, it appears Iran has already left the table and is now holding all the cards. So what is the U.S. strategy here to get the country back to the table for talks?
Well, as you know, this has been a real moment of truth. This has been one that I think that was anticipated and it was expected. And so what we're going to see now is we're going to see the U.S. potentially showing that it's going to play hardball, showing that if it requires military intervention and potential confrontation in that way, that we might potentially see that. And so the hope is obviously that we'll be able to obviously come to some sort of an agreement in a way of diplomacy, and that is obviously the preferred way. But do not be surprised if there is not further military interaction in that the U.S. Holds strong and weathers sanctions.
Well, Iran has said time and time again that the sanctions need to be lifted, and other parties are now negotiating with the United States on how they can make that happen. So why could this be an impossible move for the Biden administration?
Well, there's national security is the core and is steeped really in this issue. And so I think that, once the U.S. sees that they're able to look at some trade deals, obviously, as you said before, some of these deep down sanctions that obviously not only Iran, but China has been dealing with. And it has been a long critical piece for the U.S. policy forward. But I can guarantee, and we'll see in the next coming days, that the Biden administration, they came out very strong in the beginning with focusing on foreign affairs, trying to reverse some of what happened with the Trump administration. And I think that we will begin to see some leveling out, even if there is potential beginnings of what might look like military action against Iran. But you're not going to probably see President Biden the same way we've seen him in the past few months. He's going to probably hold a very strong arm in this area.
Well, speaking of a strong arm, in the meantime, Iran continues to develop uranium. So can its activities be checked while talks are ongoing in Vienna?
Yes, as you said, the development of the uranium, and this is, relatively has been a real declaration of further nuclear activity, and that Biden has taken a singular and swift military action when the U.S. military lives were lost and threatened in Iraq. And so we will probably see some potentially, I don't even know if we're going to potentially see bombing, Iran-backed militia, but this is going to definitely be, I think, one of the most contentious situations that we've seen in less than 100 days of the new president's administration. But the hope is that there is a nuclear deal that is able to be reenacted, and one that will obviously not only support what the U.S. has intentions for, but also is best for Iran, and that they're coming together for this.
All right. Well, Maria, we will be keeping a close eye on the situation there. Thanks so much for joining us. Do have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
The EU Commission has agreed to make a new proposal to Turkey on refuge support. During a press conference, the Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen, gave conditions that the country must abide by to make true its membership of the EU. To bilateral relations now, Russia and India are discussing additional production of Russian military equipment in India, in a move that could irk the United States, which frowns upon countries engaged in defense trade with Moscow. Speaking at a joint news conference with India's Foreign Minister, Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov did not specify what kind of equipment could be made in India. Officials from both countries have said their governments have been discussing for some years the possibility of making Russian military helicopters in India. India has made Russian MiG fighter planes and Su-30 jets under license, and the two countries have collaborated to develop and produce supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles in India. Coming up after the break. Dogs are trained to have many talents, but maybe a stint as a reporter could be in the future. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Doctor of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, Anastasia Vasilyeva, was not allowed today to enter the prison grounds where the opposition politician was held. Vasilyeva said she had applied for the meeting with the head of the prison. However, the security in front of the prison did not allow her to meet Navalny or the local medical staff. Russian police stepped up security at the prison holding Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny on Tuesday as his supporters prepared to stage a protest outside the facility to demand that authorities give him proper medical care. The 44-year-old Navalny, a prominent opponent of President Vladimir Putin, announced a hunger strike last week in protest at what he said was the refusal of prison authorities to treat him properly for an acute back and leg pain. A group of his allies say they would protest at the prison in the town of Pokrov, about 100 kilometers east of Moscow. From today, unless Navalny sees a doctor of his choice and was given what they regarded as proper medicine. Israeli President Reuven Rivlin on Tuesday announced his decision to mandate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a new government after an inconclusive election, giving Netanyahu a new lease on his political life. Israel's longest-serving leader in power consecutively since 2009 now faces the tough task of breaking an unprecedented political stalemate and enlisting enough allies for a governing coalition. Under law, Netanyahu will have 28 days to do so, with the possibility of a 2-week extension before President Reuven Rivlin picks another candidate or asks Parliament to choose one. Israel's election on March 23rd is its fourth in 2 years, and it ended with neither a Netanyahu-led right-wing and religious bloc nor a prospective alliance of his opponents winning a parliamentary majority. But in consultations Rivlin held with political parties on Monday on granting the coalition-building mandate, Netanyahu received more endorsements than his challengers, leading to the president's televised announcement giving him the nod. Villagers in Indonesia's West Malacca district have been working to clear mud from damaged homes and salvage items following flash floods triggered by a tropical cyclone that has killed at least 86 people. Rescuers have been searching for dozens of people still missing in the remote islands of southeast Indonesia, expecting more casualties in the aftermath of tropical cyclone Saroja. Indonesia's disaster agency, BNPB, revised downwards the death toll from the cyclone in the East Nusa Tenggara Islands after earlier saying 128 had died. President Joko Widodo urged his cabinet to speed up evacuation and relief efforts and restore power. Those anti-coup protests are still going on in Myanmar. Protesters in Yangon carried out a, quote, red paint strike this morning as part of the ongoing challenge to the military coup and crackdown in the country. Paint into the streets and near areas where protesters have died, with the paint representing the deceased blood. One protester said he hoped to keep motivating others to keep up the demonstration. The red paint strike comes following other campaigns involving flowers and eggs. Despite the killing of at least 564 people by the security forces since the February 1st coup, protesters have come out across the country every day to voice opposition to the overthrow of the elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi and the return of military rule. The movement, which some protesters are calling a spring revolution, has included street marches, a civil disobedience campaign of strikes, and quirky acts of rebellion organized via social media. Meanwhile, in Rohingya, activists are hiding out in Malaysia because their lives are under threat. Many have fled persecution and ethnic strife in Myanmar.
Zafar Hamad Abdul Ghani has not set foot outside his home on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur for nearly a year. He's a Rohingya Muslim refugee and activist who fled persecution and ethnic strife in Myanmar. For nearly 3 decades, he has called Malaysia home, but now the 51-year-old sees it as a prison.
As a refugee, my family and I do not see peace in Malaysia. I cannot continue normal life in Malaysia. I am still scared. For a year, I have not set foot outside. I have not seen the earth outside.
Allegations spread online that he had demanded Malaysian citizenship triggering a relentless wave of hate speech and death threats against him and his family. He denies the claims. More than 100,000 Rohingya live in Malaysia. The Muslim-majority country has long been seen as friendly to the persecuted minority. But sentiment turned a year ago, with the Rohingya being accused of spreading the coronavirus. Hate speech has spread widely online. A significant portion targeted Zafar, who heads a prominent Rohingya refugee rights organization. Zafar's children no longer attend school due to safety concerns. The family receives abusive calls and messages daily.
I think this fake news really put the communities and their family members, including children, at risk. So these are some of the human rights violations which may not be seen, but happens behind the scenes. We have not yet fully seen or studied the impact of fake news on the communities, but it cuts across economic impact, social impact, political impact, and there's also security elements where the threats were not just on social media, but also physical threats towards the refugee and asylum-seeking community.
Last year, Zafar began taking medication to cope with depression. He applied to be moved to another country, but said his request was rejected, with the UN Refugee Agency saying he did not meet its criteria for resettlement.
And as we end the program, here's the story about a dog who may have envied a reporter so much he ran off with her microphone. A weather report from Moscow streets was suddenly interrupted on Friday, April 1st, by a dog who stole the microphone from the reporter of Russian TV broadcaster MIR. At the moment when correspondent Nadezhda Sereskina started live stand-up about warm weather coming to Moscow, a golden retriever jumped at her, grabbed the microphone, and ran away. The video was published on social media on April 1st, the same day it went on air. It became one of the most popular videos on the YouTube channel of the TV broadcaster MIR, getting almost 500,000 views in 4 days. Well, that definitely made for an interesting weather report, and that is all we have for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.